paralyzed by the hospital's refusal, Emily couldn't authorize her son's surgery. Her tears fell silently in the sterile waiting room until a man's voice sliced through her despair. "I know that pain too," whispered Benjamin Clark, a stranger who understood what it meant to be helpless when someone you love is dying. In Single Mom Cried in the ER at Midnight, two broken souls find themselves facing the same abyss. Her heart stopped when he touched her trembling hand. Emily Torres gripped the edges of the plastic waiting room chair so hard her knuckles turned white, as if holding onto that chair might somehow keep her son from slipping away. The emergency room buzzed with the controlled chaos typical of midnight crises. Nurses moving with practiced efficiency, the occasional urgent page over the intercom, the soft whimpers of the sick and injured. But for Emily, the world had narrowed to a cruel paradox. Her son Ryan lay somewhere behind those swinging doors, desperately needing surgery, yet she had no legal power to authorize it. Her calloused hands, strong enough to operate heavy machinery at the construction site she supervised, were utterly useless now against the bureaucratic barrier that stood between her and her child's care. The words of the hospital administrator still rang in her ears like an accusation. "I'm sorry, but our records show that your ex-husband retains legal guardianship. We can't proceed without his consent." Emily had called him repeatedly, her voice growing increasingly desperate with each unanswered call. The custody agreement that had seemed like a mere formality when they divorced 3 years ago now loomed like a death sentence. Ryan had lived with her since the separation, his father appearing only when it suited him. Yet somehow the papers, those damnable papers, gave him the power she needed now. Her tears fell silently, dropping onto the worn jeans that still carried the dust of the worksite she'd rushed from when the school called about Ryan's sudden collapse. Through the blur of her tears, Emily noticed a man sitting across from her, his tailored suit incongruous in the fluorescent harshness of the waiting area. He'd been there when she arrived, sitting perfectly still, his face a mask of composure that seemed at odds with the setting. Only his eyes betrayed something deeper, a haunted awareness that Emily recognized instinctively. Those were the eyes of someone who had watched the lights go out in someone they loved. She quickly looked away, unwilling to acknowledge the connection, too consumed by her own helplessness to bear the weight of another's grief. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly, each second taking Ryan further from her, each minute a reminder of her powerlessness. The nurse who approached her looked tired but kind, her sensible shoes squeaking slightly against the linoleum floor. "Ms. Torres, we really need to make a decision about the surgery. The doctor says Ryan's appendix could rupture any minute now." Emily's composure finally broke, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from some primal place inside her. "I can't," she choked out. "I legally can't. He's my son. But the papers say—" She couldn't finish, the absurdity of the situation overwhelming her. She was a woman who solved problems every day, who commanded respect from men twice her size on the construction site. Yet here she stood, reduced to begging for permission to save her own child's life. In her periphery, she noticed the suited man shift slightly, his attention clearly drawn by her outburst. Emily ran her fingers through her dark hair, still flecked with the day's concrete dust, suddenly self-conscious about her work clothes, her unwashed face, her complete lack of the polish that surrounded this stranger. Yet when she dared to meet his gaze again, there was no judgment there, only a quiet recognition that made her breath catch. He stood with a fluid grace that spoke of comfort in his own skin, and crossed the small waiting area to sit beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said softly. "I know that pain too, the feeling that everything that matters is on the other side of a door you can't open." Emily stared at him, surprised by the rawness in his carefully modulated voice. Something in the way he spoke made her believe him. This wasn't empty sympathy or awkward platitudes. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed in her hand. Her ex-husband, finally returning her call, his voice slurred and indifferent. "Can't it wait until morning? I'm kind of in the middle of something." The rage that surged through Emily was electric, momentarily displacing her despair. "Your son might die while you're in the middle of something," she hissed, aware of the stranger beside her witnessing her humiliation, her complete helplessness in the face of a system that had failed her when it mattered most. Benjamin Clark had been sitting in the same hard plastic chair for 3 hours, his bespoke suit creased from the vigil. This wasn't his hospital. Not the private facility with its discreet concierge service and gourmet meals that his considerable wealth would typically afford him. But tonight marked the anniversary of his wife's death, and some masochistic impulse had drawn him to this public emergency room, the kind of place where Sarah had died, while he'd been across the country closing a deal. The kind of place that reminded him of all the power his billions couldn't buy. He'd come seeking penance, or perhaps just to feel close to her through shared suffering, but instead found himself watching a woman being torn apart by the very system he navigated with ease. The construction forewoman, he'd determined her profession from the logo on her dust-covered jacket, radiated a fierce dignity even as she crumbled. Her dark eyes flashed with intelligence and determination, even through her tears, and something about her struggle resonated deep within him. Benjamin had spent 3 years building walls around himself. Retreating into the cold comfort of his wealth after Sarah's sudden aneurysm had left him a childless widower at 38. Yet this stranger's raw pain breached those defenses without effort, calling to something human in him that had been dormant for too long. When she hung up her phone call, her hand shaking with suppressed rage, he found himself speaking without conscious decision. "I have a legal team on retainer," he said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt. "They specialize in expedited filings and emergency interventions. If you'll allow me, they could have temporary guardianship papers drawn up within the hour." The woman looked at him with sudden suspicion, her vulnerability immediately shielded by wariness. Benjamin couldn't blame her. He understood how his offer must sound from a stranger. "I'm sorry, I should introduce myself. Benjamin Clark." He intentionally left off the details that would identify him as the Benjamin Clark, owner of Clark Innovations and one of the wealthiest men in the state. "I lost my wife 3 years ago tonight. Different circumstances, but the same walls between me and the person I needed to reach." Emily's expression shifted from suspicion to a complex mix of caution and desperate hope. "Why would you help me? You don't know me or my son." Her directness was refreshing after years of people carefully calculating every word they said to him. Benjamin considered his answer carefully, aware that the truth sounded either melodramatic or calculating, that something about her fierce love for her son had wakened him from a 3-year sleepwalk through his own existence. "Because I can," he said simply. "And because time matters right now." He took out his phone, giving her space to decide. "Just say the word and I'll make the call. No strings, no expectations. Just help from one human to another." The nurse returned, her expression more urgent than before. "Ms. Torres, the doctor says we really can't wait any longer. If you can't authorize the procedure." Emily's face hardened with decision, turning to Benjamin with the kind of trust that comes only in moments of absolute crisis. "Make the call," she said, her voice steady now. "Please." Benjamin nodded, stepping away to speak rapidly into his phone, his tone shifting to the crisp authority of a man accustomed to making things happen. Emily watched him, this stranger in expensive shoes who had appeared like some bizarre guardian angel in her darkest moment. She didn't believe in fairy tales or knights in shining armor. Life had beaten that naivete out of her long ago, but she believed in grasping any lifeline when her son was drowning. When Benjamin returned, the efficiency of his actions was almost frightening. A hospital administrator appeared moments later, followed by a woman in a sharp suit who presented Emily with temporary emergency guardianship papers. "How did you do this?" Emily whispered to Benjamin as she signed where indicated, her hand steadier now that there was action to take. Benjamin's smile held a trace of bitterness. Money opens doors that should never have been closed in the first place. Before Emily could respond, the doors to the surgical wing opened and a doctor approached. "Ms. Torres, we'll take Ryan into surgery now. The papers came through just in time." Emily stood, suddenly torn between following her son and acknowledging the stranger who had made it possible. Benjamin stepped back, giving her a small nod. "Go, be with your son. That's all that matters now." As Emily disappeared through the swinging doors, Benjamin remained in the waiting room, surprised by his own reluctance to leave. He had done what he could, arranged for all medical expenses to be quietly covered, ensured the hospital's best surgical team was assembled despite the late hour. Yet something kept him rooted to the uncomfortable chair as dawn approached. Perhaps it was the unusual feeling of having made a tangible difference in someone's life, so different from the abstract impact of his business dealings or his substantial but distant philanthropic efforts. Or perhaps it was simply that for the first time in 3 years, the anniversary of Sarah's death had passed with him, thinking of something beyond his own grief. The sunlight filtering through the hospital blinds created striped patterns across Ryan's sleeping face, making him appear even younger than his 10 years. Emily sat beside his bed, her body aching from the night spent in the chair, her mind still processing the whirlwind events that had brought them here. The surgery had been successful, the infected appendix removed just in time, and now her son's chest rose and fell with the peaceful rhythm of healing sleep. She brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead, marveling as she always did at how much he resembled her father. The same determined chin, the same thick eyelashes that seemed wasted on a boy. The fear that had gripped her heart all night eased a little more with each steady beep of the monitors. The private room was another mystery. She'd been told they'd been upgraded, without explanation, and Emily suspected the hand of her strange benefactor. The memory of Benjamin Clark brought a conflicted flush to her cheeks. In the harsh light of morning, his intervention seemed both miraculous and unsettling. Who was this man who could move mountains with a phone call? What kind of power did he wield that made hospital administrators and legal systems bend to his will? And more troubling, what would he expect in return? Emily had learned early in life that nothing came without a price, especially when it came from men with power. The construction industry had taught her that lesson repeatedly, as had her marriage to Ryan's father, who had viewed her independence as a challenge to be conquered rather than a strength to be respected. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting a nurse, Emily was startled to find Benjamin Clark standing in the doorway, looking surprisingly human in the morning light. Gone was the perfect composure of the night before. In its place was a man who appeared to have slept as poorly as she had, though his fresh shirt and neatly combed hair suggested he'd at least had the opportunity to change clothes. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice quieter than necessary in deference to Ryan's sleep. I wanted to see how he was doing. There was an awkwardness to him now, as if the intensity of the night had created an intimacy between them that neither knew how to navigate in daylight. Emily found herself noticing details she'd missed before, the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter once upon a time, the careful way he held himself, like someone conscious of taking up too much space. "The doctors say he'll make a full recovery," Emily replied, surprised by the hoarseness in her voice. "They said if the surgery had been delayed even an hour longer." She couldn't finish the sentence, the narrowly avoided tragedy still too raw. Benjamin nodded, understanding without requiring the words. He remained in the doorway, not presuming to enter what felt like sacred space. "I've taken care of the hospital bills," he said, raising a hand to forestall her protest. "Please let me do this. It's the least I can do." Emily wanted to object, to insist on her independence, to reject what could easily be seen as charity. But Ryan's peaceful breathing beside her reminded her that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford when weighed against her son's well-being. Still, she couldn't quite suppress the spark of defiance that had carried her through far worse challenges than this. "I don't know who you are or why you helped us," Emily said, meeting his gaze directly. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not a damsel in distress looking for rescue. What happened last night, that wasn't me. I run a 12-man crew on the West Side development. I've rebuilt my life after my ex-husband tried to tear it down. I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express, but I won't be indebted to anyone, not even someone who saved my son's life." The words came out harsher than she'd intended, her exhaustion and lingering fear making her defensive. Benjamin's expression shifted, not to offense as she'd expected, but to something that looked surprisingly like respect. He stepped into the room then, moving to stand at the foot of Ryan's bed, his eyes taking in the boy's sleeping form, with an expression Emily couldn't quite decipher. "I didn't help you because I thought you needed rescuing, Ms. Torres," he said quietly. "I helped because 3 years ago, I was sitting alone in a hospital when they told me my wife was gone. No one could help me then, but last night I could help you." The simple honesty in his voice disarmed Emily more effectively than any grand gesture or explanation could have. "And as for who I am," he continued with a small, self-deprecating smile, "I'm just someone who recognized that look in your eyes, the one that says the world is falling apart, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Emily felt something shift between them, some barrier dissolving in the face of their shared understanding of loss, though hers had been narrowly averted while his had been irrevocable. Before she could respond, Ryan stirred beside her, his eyes fluttering open, immediately finding her face with the instinctive certainty of a child who has never doubted his mother's presence. 2 weeks after that night in the emergency room, Emily found herself standing in the lobby of Clark Tower, a gleaming monument to wealth and power that rose 60 stories above the city's financial district. The security guard eyed her work boots and jeans with barely concealed skepticism as she stated her business. "I'm here to see Benjamin Clark." The name created an immediate shift in the man's demeanor, surprise replacing suspicion as he made a discreet call. Emily shifted uncomfortably, acutely aware of how out of place she looked among the sleek professionals gliding through the marble-floored atrium. She hadn't wanted to come here, but the envelope that had arrived at her apartment yesterday had left her no choice. The insurance statement had detailed coverage for Ryan's surgery, hospital stay, and follow-up care, all of it mysteriously paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. The amount was staggering, more money than Emily would make in 2 years of hard labor. While she had reluctantly accepted Benjamin's help during that night of crisis, this felt different, an overreach that threatened her hard-won independence. She had been raised to pay her debts, to stand on her own 2 feet no matter how uneven the ground. The fact that Benjamin had arranged this without discussion, without giving her any choice in the matter, had ignited a slow-burning anger that propelled her across town after her shift ended, determined to confront him face to face. The private elevator whisked her to the top floor with disorienting speed, depositing her in a reception area that seemed designed to intimidate with its minimalist luxury. The young woman at the desk greeted her by name before Emily could speak, another unsettling reminder of the disparity in their positions. "Mr. Clark is expecting you, Ms. Torres. Please follow me." As she was led through a series of increasingly impressive spaces, Emily felt her resolve wavering slightly. What had seemed like righteous indignation in the familiar context of her own world now felt like petulance in the face of such obvious power. But the thought of Ryan, of the example she wanted to set for her son, strengthened her spine. Wealth didn't give anyone the right to make decisions for her, no matter how well-intentioned. Benjamin rose from behind a desk the size of her dining table when she entered, his expression guarded but welcoming. The office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, seemed to emphasize rather than diminish the man himself. "Emily," he said, using her first name with a careful familiarity that hadn't been established between them. "This is an unexpected pleasure." There was no condescension in his tone, just a genuine warmth that momentarily threw her off balance. Emily pulled the insurance statement from her bag, placing it on the desk between them like a gauntlet. "I can't accept this," she said without preamble. "I'm grateful for what you did that night, Mr. Clark, but this crosses a line. I don't need charity, and I don't want my son growing up thinking that's how the world works." Benjamin's expression shifted, a flicker of hurt crossing his features before his composure returned. "It wasn't charity, Emily. It was human decency." He moved from behind the desk, reducing the physical barrier between them in a gesture that seemed symbolic. Up close, Emily noticed again the details that humanized him. The slight asymmetry of his features, the way one eyebrow rose slightly higher than the other when he spoke. I have resources that most people don't. Using them to help a child get medical care isn't charity. It's just the right thing to do. His reasoning was so simple, so devoid of the condescension she'd expected, that Emily found her carefully prepared arguments faltering. But why? She pressed, needing to understand. Why us? Why Ryan? Something vulnerable passed across Benjamin's face, gone so quickly Emily might have imagined it if not for the sudden tension in his shoulders. Because I couldn't save someone I loved once, he said quietly. And because I've spent 3 years hiding in this tower, using my money to keep the world at arm's length. That night in the hospital, watching you fight for your son with everything you had, it woke something in me. Something I thought had died with Sarah. The raw honesty in his voice silenced Emily more effectively than any eloquent justification could have. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the billionaire or the benefactor, but simply a man who had lost his way and was trying to find it again, however imperfectly. I just didn't want you to lose someone like I did, Benjamin continued, the words emerging as if pulled from some deep well inside him. But I overstepped, and I apologize for that. He picked up the insurance statement, his fingers brushing hers briefly in a contact that sent an unexpected current through Emily's arm. If you want to work out a payment plan, we can do that. Or I can arrange a scholarship for Ryan through my foundation. Completely transparent, no strings attached. Whatever would make you comfortable. The sincerity in his offer, the way he was trying to honor her pride, even as he stood in this monument to wealth that would make the amount trivial to him, touched Emily in a way she hadn't expected. She found herself seeing the man beneath the money, and that man was far more complicated and far more interesting than the savior figure she'd been prepared to confront. The community center gymnasium echoed with the squeak of sneakers and the rhythmic bounce of basketballs as Emily sat on the bleachers, watching Ryan practice with his team. 3 weeks had passed since her confrontation with Benjamin in his office, and their lives had settled back into their familiar routine, or so she told herself, ignoring the way her thoughts kept returning to that conversation, to the unexpected vulnerability she'd glimpsed in a man who seemed to have everything. She'd ultimately accepted his offer of a scholarship for Ryan through his foundation, a compromise that allowed her to maintain her dignity while ensuring her son's medical needs were covered. What she hadn't expected was the text message that arrived as she watched Ryan execute a perfect layup. Look up. Emily's head jerked up instinctively, scanning the gymnasium until her eyes landed on Benjamin standing by the entrance, dressed in casual clothes that still somehow marked him as different from the other parents in their worn jeans and work shirts. Her heart gave an inexplicable lurch at the sight of him, a reaction she immediately tried to suppress. He approached slowly, giving her ample opportunity to reject his presence, his movements careful as if approaching a wild animal that might flee. I hope you don't mind, he said as he reached her, his voice pitched low enough to be private in the noisy gym. Ryan mentioned his practice when I called to check on him last week. I thought I might come and see how he's doing. The revelation that Benjamin had been in contact with her son sent a conflicted wave of emotions through Emily. Concern at the boundary crossed, warmth at his genuine interest, confusion about what exactly was developing between them. Ryan spotted Benjamin then, his face lighting up with an enthusiasm that twisted something in Emily's chest. Her son waved excitedly before returning his attention to the drill, his movements more focused, more determined, clearly aware of their observer. He's good, Benjamin commented, taking a seat beside Emily with a respectful distance between them. He has your determination. The simple observation, the way he had seen something of her in her son, touched Emily unexpectedly. Most people, including Ryan's father, had always commented on how little the boy resembled her physically. But Benjamin had seen beyond appearance to something essential, something that connected mother and son in a way DNA couldn't capture. He's had to be determined, Emily replied, her voice softening. Life hasn't always been easy for him. The practice continued, But Emily found herself increasingly aware of Benjamin beside her. The clean scent of his cologne, the way he leaned forward with genuine interest when Ryan took a shot, the careful space he maintained between them that somehow felt more intimate than if he'd sat closer. When he occasionally asked questions about the game or about Ryan's recovery, his attention remained fully on her response, as if her words were valuable simply because they were hers. It was a novel experience for Emily, who had grown accustomed to being overlooked or underestimated in most of her interactions with men. Benjamin Clark, with all his wealth and power, seemed to see her more clearly than people who had known her for years. As the practice ended, and Ryan bounded over to them, sweaty and exuberant, Emily found herself caught in a moment of startling clarity. The three of them, standing together in the echoing gymnasium, it created a picture she hadn't allowed herself to imagine since her marriage had disintegrated. A family. The thought was both tantalizing and terrifying, a possibility she had no right to contemplate, especially with a man whose world was so far removed from her own. Ryan's excited chatter about his performance filled the space between them as they walked together to the parking lot. But Emily felt the weight of unspoken words, of possibilities neither of them had acknowledged. At her car, a 12-year-old sedan that had seen better days, Benjamin hesitated, clearly wanting to say something more. Instead, he simply smiled at Ryan and said, "You played well today." I was impressed. As Emily drove home, Ryan's enthusiastic recounting of the practice gradually shifted to questions about Benjamin. "Is he your friend, Mom? He seems nice. And he knows a lot about basketball. He said his company sponsors the NBA youth program. Do you think he might come to my game on Saturday?" The eagerness in her son's voice created a complicated knot of emotions in Emily's chest. Ryan had few male role models in his life. Her own father had passed away years ago, and her ex-husband's sporadic appearances did more harm than good. The idea of Benjamin filling that void was both appealing and dangerous. "He's just someone who helped us when we needed it, honey," she answered carefully. "I don't know if he'll come to your game." But even as she spoke, Emily found herself hoping he would, and the realization troubled her more than she wanted to admit. The letter from her ex-husband's lawyer arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official letterhead and clinical language concealing the emotional bomb contained within its paragraphs. Emily read it 3 times, her hands growing colder with each pass through the carefully worded threat. Robert Torres was filing for full custody of Ryan, citing Emily's financial instability and dependency on wealthy benefactors as evidence of her unfitness as a parent. The letter specifically mentioned the medical bills paid by an unrelated male party, insinuating an improper relationship that compromised Ryan's well-being. The court date was set for just 3 weeks away, barely enough time to prepare a defense, much less afford the kind of legal representation that could match Robert's expensive attorney. The room seemed to tilt around Emily as the implications sank in. Robert had never wanted custody before. His child support payments were chronically late, his visitations sporadic at best. This sudden interest in parental rights coincided suspiciously with his recent marriage to a wealthy woman from a politically connected family. Emily sank into a kitchen chair, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. Robert could afford the best lawyers, could spin a narrative that portrayed her as an unstable woman using her son to secure financial support from men. The truth, that she had worked herself to exhaustion providing for Ryan, that Benjamin's help had been given freely with no expectations, would be twisted into something sordid and self-serving. With shaking hands, Emily called the legal aid office only to be told there was a 2-month waiting list for family court cases. Private attorneys quoted retainers that might as well have been millions for all her ability to pay them. As panic began to close her throat, Emily thought of Benjamin, of his resources, his connections, his obvious ability to navigate systems that confounded ordinary people like her. But reaching out to him now would only reinforce Robert's narrative, providing more ammunition for his custody claim. The fact that her instinct was to turn to Benjamin in this crisis frightened Emily almost as much as the custody threat itself. When had she begun to rely on this man who had entered their lives by chance? What did it say about her independence, her ability to protect her son on her own? The construction site provided no escape from her thoughts, even as Emily threw herself into her work with renewed intensity. The rhythmic pounding of nail guns and the whine of circular saws that usually centered her now only heightened her anxiety, each sound a countdown to the hearing that might take her son away. During her lunch break, she sat alone in her truck, researching custody laws on her phone, making notes about character witnesses and evidence of her parenting abilities. But each article, each piece of advice, only underscored the disadvantage she faced as a working-class single mother against her ex-husband's new family's resources. When her phone rang, Benjamin's name appearing on the screen, Emily nearly declined the call out of a superstitious fear that even this contact might somehow be used against her. "Emily, are you all right? You sound strange," Benjamin said immediately when she answered, his perception of her mood despite her careful greeting unsettling in its accuracy. For a wild moment, Emily considered lying, maintaining the illusion of control that had carried her through so many crises before. But something in Benjamin's voice, the genuine concern, the lack of any agenda, broke through her defenses. The story poured out of her in a rush of words, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. Benjamin listened without interruption, the quality of his silence conveying more support than empty reassurances could have. When she finished, the pause that followed was heavy with implications they both understood. This was a moment of decision, a crossroads that would define whatever was developing between them. "Let me help you, Emily," Benjamin said finally, his voice calm but intent. "Not with money this time, though I would if that's what you needed, but with connections. I know people in family court, judges who can't be bought, lawyers who fight for what's right rather than what's profitable. Let me make some calls." The offer hung between them, tempting in its simplicity, yet complex in its consequences. Accepting would mean acknowledging that she couldn't do this alone, that the systems designed to protect families like hers were weighted against her without the balance of privilege and power that Benjamin represented. It would mean trusting him on a deeper level, allowing him further into the fortress she'd built around herself and Ryan, but refusing out of pride might cost her the very thing she was fighting to protect. Emily closed her eyes, seeing Ryan's face, his trust in her to always make things right. "Okay," she whispered into the phone. "Help us, please." The family courthouse gleamed with the impersonal efficiency of all government buildings, its marble floors and wooden benches designed to intimidate as much as to serve. Emily sat rigid beside her attorney, a sharp-eyed woman Benjamin had connected her with, who had taken the case at a reduced rate, as a favor to Ben. The phrase had raised questions Emily hadn't had time to explore, too consumed with preparation for this day that would determine her son's future. Across the aisle, Robert sat with his new wife and his attorney, looking more polished than Emily had ever seen him, his familiar smirk barely concealed beneath a veneer of paternal concern. The sight of him, the man who had belittled her ambitions, who had treated parenthood as an inconvenience until it became useful to his image, made something cold and hard form in Emily's stomach. Ryan had been taken to a waiting room with a court-appointed guardian, his confusion and fear when Emily had explained the situation still haunting her. "But I don't want to live with Dad," he had said, his voice small yet certain. "You're my home, Mom." Those words had become Emily's mantra through sleepless nights of preparation, through endless meetings with the lawyer, through the humiliating process of having her parenting evaluated by strangers who knew nothing of the life she'd built for her son. Benjamin had been a silent support through it all, never overstepping yet always available when she reached out. He had attended none of the preparatory meetings, careful not to give Robert's side any additional ammunition regarding their relationship. The judge entered, a stern woman whose reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck, her expression giving nothing away as she reviewed the file before her. The proceedings began with Robert's attorney painting a picture of Emily as a struggling single mother who had turned to the charity of a wealthy man to cover her son's medical expenses. "And what example does this set for the child?" the lawyer asked rhetorically. "That women should seek out men of means when faced with challenges? That financial security comes not from one's own efforts, but from finding the right benefactor? Each insinuation landed like a physical blow, twisting the pure moment of connection Emily had shared with Benjamin in that hospital into something tawdry and calculated. She kept her expression neutral with tremendous effort, knowing every reaction was being scrutinized. When Emily's attorney presented their case, focusing on her stable employment, Ryan's excellent school records, and the consistent home environment she had provided, Emily felt a flicker of hope. Character witnesses, her foreman, Ryan's teacher, even her elderly neighbor who watched him after school, testified to her dedication as a mother. But Robert's attorney skillfully returned to the issue of the medical bills, suggesting a dependency that undermined her claims of self-sufficiency. As the questioning continued, Emily felt the ground shifting beneath her, the narrative slipping from her control despite the facts being presented. The judge's expression remained unreadable, offering no clue as to which way her decision might lean. Emily's hands, clasped tightly in her lap, had gone numb with tension when the courtroom doors opened. Benjamin Clark walked in, his presence immediately commanding attention without any visible effort on his part. He was dressed impeccably but not ostentatiously, his manner respectful as he approached the bench. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe I have information pertinent to these proceedings." The judge's eyebrow rose slightly, but she nodded, allowing him to approach. Emily's heart thundered in her chest, fear and hope warring within her. What was he doing? This wasn't part of the plan they'd discussed. Robert's expression had darkened at Benjamin's entrance, his attorney leaning over to whisper urgently in his ear. Whatever Benjamin was about to do, it clearly wasn't what they had expected either. "Your Honor, my name is Benjamin Clark. I am the person who arranged payment for Ryan Torres's medical expenses, which seems to be a central issue in this case." His voice carried clearly through the courtroom, calm and measured. "I would like to clarify my relationship with Ms. Torres and her son, as it has been grossly mischaracterized." The judge studied him over her glasses, then nodded for him to continue. Benjamin turned slightly, his gaze meeting Emily's briefly, something unspoken passing between them before he addressed the court again. "I met Emily Torres on the worst night of her life, when her son needed emergency surgery, and she was prevented from authorizing it by the very custody arrangement being leveraged against her today. I helped because I could, because 3 years ago I lost my wife due to a similar bureaucratic barrier, and because it was the right thing to do." The simplicity of his statement, devoid of legal jargon or emotional manipulation, carried a weight that more elaborate testimony couldn't have achieved. Benjamin continued, each word measured and deliberate. "In the weeks since, I have come to know Emily and Ryan. I have witnessed firsthand her extraordinary strength as a mother, her dedication to providing not just financially, but emotionally for her son. And in doing so, I have found myself falling in love with her, not as a charity case, not as someone to rescue, but as an equal whose courage and integrity humble me daily." The declaration hung in the air, stunning Emily as much as everyone else in the courtroom. Benjamin had never spoken these words to her directly, yet hearing them now, she recognized their truth in the way her heart responded. The recognition of feelings she had been too afraid to acknowledge even to herself. Autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet as Emily and Benjamin walked through the park, Ryan running ahead to the playground with the boundless energy of a child secure in his world. 6 months had passed since the custody hearing, since Benjamin's unexpected declaration had shifted the course of all their lives. The judge had ultimately awarded Emily full custody, citing Robert's history of minimal involvement and the stability of the home environment she had created. Benjamin's testimony had been noted in the decision not as evidence of dependency, but as character testimony from a respected community member. The formal language had made Emily smile when she read it, as if Benjamin's billions made him more credible than her neighbors or co-workers who had known her for years. The relationship that had begun in crisis had evolved slowly, deliberately, both of them conscious of the power imbalance inherent in their different circumstances. Benjamin had been patient, never pushing for more than Emily was ready to give, respecting the boundaries she established for herself and for Ryan. Their first official date had been to a community theater production. Benjamin's suggestion, in neutral territory where neither of them held the advantage. Emily had been surprised by his genuine enjoyment of the amateur performance, his lack of pretension despite being accustomed to Broadway openings and private showings. "This is real," he had said when she commented on it. "These people are performing because they love it, not because it's profitable or prestigious. That makes it more valuable, not less." Now, watching Ryan climb confidently on the playground structure, Emily felt Benjamin's hand find hers, his fingers interlacing with her own in a gesture that had become familiar, yet still sent a quiet thrill through her. "He's completely recovered," Benjamin observed, his gaze on Ryan matching her own in its protective watchfulness. "You'd never know he was in surgery 6 months ago." Emily nodded, squeezing his hand in acknowledgement of all that had changed since that night. "I never thanked you properly," she said quietly. "Not just for the help with the medical bills or the custody hearing, but for seeing me, really seeing me, when I felt invisible to the world." Benjamin turned to her then, his expression serious despite the casual setting. "You were never invisible, Emily. You were the most real thing I had seen in 3 years of hiding from life." The honesty between them had become their foundation, each of them stripped of pretense by the circumstances of their meeting. Emily had visited Benjamin's world, charity galas, board meetings, the rarefied air of wealth and influence, and found it less intimidating than she had feared, largely because of how Benjamin moved through it. He wore his privilege lightly, using it as a tool rather than a weapon or a shield. In turn, Benjamin had entered Emily's world without judgment or condescension, joining neighborhood cookouts and school functions with genuine interest. He had even spent a day at the construction site, earning reluctant respect from her crew when he helped troubleshoot an electrical issue with unexpected knowledge. Their worlds were merging, not colliding, each of them expanding rather than compromising. "I have something to ask you," Benjamin said as they settled on a bench, close enough to supervise Ryan but giving him the independence he craved. The seriousness in his tone made Emily turn to face him fully, suddenly aware of her heartbeat. "You know I love you," he continued, his certainty about this fact still sometimes surprising to Emily, who had spent so many years believing love was conditional at best. "And I love Ryan. These past months have shown me what family really means, not an abstract concept or a legal definition, but a choice we make every day to put each other first." Emily felt a tightening in her throat, recognizing the direction of his words but almost afraid to believe it. Benjamin reached into his pocket, drawing out not a jewelry box as she had half expected, but a folded document. "This is the deed to a house," he explained as he opened it for her to see. "Not a mansion or a penthouse, but a home in your neighborhood, close to Ryan's school and your work. It's in both our names." Before Emily could process this, he continued, his voice steady but vulnerable. "I'm not asking you to give up your independence or to let me solve all your problems. I'm asking if we can build something together, a life where we both bring our strengths, where Ryan can grow up seeing that love isn't about power or control, but about partnership." He finally met her eyes directly, the emotion there raw and unguarded. "Will you marry me, Emily? Not as my savior or as someone I saved, but as my equal in every way that matters?" The question hung between them, weighted with all they had been through together and all that might lie ahead. Emily thought of the frightened, helpless woman she had been in that hospital waiting room, and of the strong, certain man before her who had been equally lost in his own way. They had found each other in darkness and built something unexpected in the light that followed. She thought of Ryan, who had taken to Benjamin not as a replacement for the father who had failed him, but as someone new and trustworthy in his own right. She thought of her own heart, which had rebuilt its capacity to trust against all odds and experiences. Emily's answer, when it came, was as simple and as complex as their journey had been, a word that acknowledged their shared pain while embracing their common future. "Yes," she said, feeling tears of joy blur the autumn landscape around them. "Yes to building something new from all we've lost. Yes to second chances." The house on Sycamore Street smelled faintly of fresh paint and cinnamon when they carried the last box inside, a scent that felt like beginning and memory in equal measure. Afternoon light pooled on the hardwood like warm honey, catching the dancing dust motes Ryan tried to trap in his cupped hands, laughing when they slipped through. Emily ran her palm along the kitchen counter, a sturdy butcher block slab she and Benjamin had installed together, sanding shoulder to shoulder, until the grain lifted like waves under their fingers. "It'll scar," she'd warned when he proposed the material. "So will we," he'd answered, smiling, "and we'll call it character." The keys on the ring chimed as they set them in a small bowl by the door, and something settled in her chest that did not feel like surrender, only arrival. Outside, the wind tugged at the new porch swing, and across the street the neighbor's dog barked once, as if announcing to the block that the promise they'd made in a park was moving in for good. News of their engagement dropped into the world, the way pebbles fall into a pond. Small at first, ripples widening until they kissed far shores. A business blog ran a headline that tried to make a fairy tale out of what had been mostly grit, tenderness, and choice. A tabloid angled for a past that wasn't theirs to sell. Benjamin skimmed the clamor and answered none of it, redirecting attention with the quiet authority that had always made room rather than taking it. Emily learned the strange choreography of being looked at while buying milk, of having strangers mistake her resilience for luck, and her history for a ladder she hadn't built herself. On the nights when the scrutiny felt like sand in her eyes, he drew the curtains and brewed tea and asked about the tensile strength of steel beams until she laughed and peeled the day off her shoulders. In the morning, she tied her boots, kissed Ryan's hair, and left for the site because what steadies you is rarely glamorous. They married in the community garden behind the rec center, between beds of tomatoes that bowed under their own abundance, and sunflowers that kept their faces turned the right way. Ryan stood between them in a navy blazer 2 sizes too big, his solemnity cracking into delight when the ring slipped past Emily's knuckle, and Benjamin's hands trembled in relief. The vows were simple and unadorned, promises that would have looked plain on paper but shone like water when spoken aloud. To tell the truth quickly, to repair before sleeping, to fold grief into the dough of ordinary days. A breeze lifted the edges of the tablecloths, and Mrs. Alvarez from down the hall cried openly while pretending it was the wind in her eyes. Emily's crew arrived with calloused hands and nervous ties, and one by one they clapped Benjamin on the back as if testing a beam, satisfied by the give and the strength. When twilight came, strings of borrowed light stitched the sky to the earth, and for hours the city felt like a town that remembered everyone's names. After the wedding, the work of love resumed with its familiar hum and occasional sparks. They signed the deed again at the kitchen table, this time with Ryan's careful witness, explaining clause by clause why equity is a daily practice and not only a word on paper. In the living room, a framed photo of Sarah stood beside a jar of seashells Ryan had collected years ago, history and tide sharing a ledge without argument. Emily lit a candle on Sarah's birthday and told Ryan about a woman he had never met, but whose absence had shaped the man he now called Ben, maintaining the kind of respect that builds rooms where the living can breathe. Benjamin listened, breathing through the ache with a gratitude that surprised him. Grief did not recede so much as it learned new manners in a house where it was welcomed but no longer in charge. Sometimes the candle guttered and caught, sometimes it burned straight and calm, sometimes it went out and they let the dark be gentle for a while. Either way, they learned that remembrance does not compete with love when both are kept honest. In early spring, the Foundation's new initiative launched quietly, a legal clinic for emergency consent, staffed by advocates who answered phones at midnight and knew which doors to knock on with urgency that did not apologize. Emily insisted on a name that did not belong to anyone, choosing Open Doors because it reminded her of the hinge that had separated her from Ryan when everything mattered. She spoke at the opening wearing work jeans and a blazer that still smelled of rain, telling the story without ornament, letting the plain facts be the argument they already were. Benjamin watched from the back, hands in pockets, a man who understood that good power is most itself when it amplifies and then steps aside. Later, When the first hospital called to say the clinic's paperwork had cut hours from a dangerous wait, she sat on the stoop and cried into her palms. And he did not try to fix the moment. He only took the seat beside her and matched her breathing until it steadied. They did not say, "Never again." Only, "Not if we can help it," which is the bravest promise mortals get to make. Robert's appeal arrived like weather the forecasts had warned about, but that still startled when the sky darkened at noon. The filing was thin and loud, all accusation and little bone. Yet it required attention because storms do not turn back just because you have other plans. This time, the judge's clerk called them first, a courtesy that felt less like favoritism and more like institutional memory learning from itself. Emily met her lawyer at the cafe near the courthouse, ordered coffee strong enough to carry a small boat, and read through the pages with the focus of a forewoman reading blueprints before a pour. "We'll answer, and we'll win," her attorney said, and for the first time the words did not sound like hope dressed up as certainty. They sounded like a conclusion the facts were already leaning toward. When the appeal was dismissed, the relief did not explode. It exhaled, long and low, like a beam settling exactly where the math said it should. At home, life unfolded in increments that added up when nobody was keeping tally. The porch swing learned the weight of 3 at once, their shoulders knocking in companionable collisions that wrote small bruises of joy on summer evenings. Ryan grew taller in a series of astonishments, his sneakers migrating from the mat by the door to the middle of the hallway, and back again after reminders delivered with practiced exasperation and hidden smiles. Emily's crew finished the West Side project 2 months ahead of schedule, and on the last day she brought Ryan and Benjamin to the site, showing them the corner where she had solved a problem with a length of twine and a better angle. "You see," she said, pointing to the clean lines of the finished truss, "things hold when opposites share the load." Benjamin nodded as if she had told him the secret to breathing, which she had, only with steel instead of lungs. Grief visited as rain sometimes, an afternoon shower that left the street shining and the air scrubbed. On the 3rd anniversary of the night in the ER, they drove to the small cemetery where Sarah lay, the path flanked by rosemary and bees that worked without rhetoric. Benjamin brushed fallen petals from the stone and introduced his wife and stepson with a voice that did not shake even when his hands did. Emily stood back, then stepped close, the way one approaches a river. Respect first, then trust. "Thank you for loving him before I did," she whispered, a sentence that felt like a bridge that had always been waiting for feet. Ryan placed a finger-painted stone at the base, its colors a little wild, its intention precise, and they left as they had arrived, together, with room between them for the one who could not walk, but still traveled with them. In autumn, Open Doors published a report that turned anecdotes into argument, data into a map for the people with pens. A senator called. A hospital network asked for training. A mother in another city sent a postcard that said only, "We made it in time." Emily presented their findings at a modest podium with scuffed edges, and when questions turned technical, she grinned and talked triage flow and consent precedents, as if describing roof pitch in a storm. Benjamin took the late flight home from a board meeting to be there, arriving with airport coffee and a tie loosened to the honest degree that means, "I ran." Afterward, under the thin gold of streetlights, they walked to the car slow, not to delay leaving, but to give the moment time to be absorbed by their bones. "Do you ever think," he asked, "about the door we couldn't open then?" She squeezed his fingers once and said, "Every time I open another one now." Winter was kind to them in that complicated way where hardship pairs with warmth. The furnace hiccuped and then failed during the first cold snap, and they camped in the living room, sleeping in a sprawl of quilts while the repair waited until morning. Ryan told a ghost story that wasn't scary until the house settled and the vent sighed, at which point Benjamin, very seriously, negotiated a protection treaty with the imaginary specter that included rights, responsibilities, and a clause about snack distribution. Emily woke in the half-light to find both of them turned toward her like sunflowers in their sleep, And for a long, quiet minute, she practiced the kind of gratitude that doesn't perform, only breathes. When the heat returned with its loyal clank, they cheered as if welcoming a friend who had only stepped outside for air, and then they went about their day, which is the real heroism most days ask for. On the first anniversary of the garden wedding, they invited the neighborhood back not for ceremony but for Chilean music and the comfort of showing up again. Mrs. Alvarez brought a cake that leaned a little left. Emily set it right with a folded napkin and said, "See, even sweetness needs shims." Benjamin manned the grill and listened to Mr. Patel explain the finer points of cricket with the patience of a man who learned, very late, that attention is a luxury he is lucky to afford. Ryan and his friends played HORSE in the alley, until dusk turned the ball into a planet on a private orbit. And when someone missed by a mile, they laughed as if the air itself had a better sense of humor near home. When the light snapped on, the yard looked like a promise kept, and in the doorway, Emily caught Benjamin watching the room the way architects look at finished rooms, measuring not the materials but the feeling they hold. Years do not announce themselves as chapters so much as they rustle, like pages being turned by a breeze you made together without ever once agreeing to blow. Work shifted and expanded. New contracts, newly trained advocates, a scholarship fund that kept its receipts tidy and its criteria generous. Ryan outgrew the blazer, then the bike, then the need to ask before taking the good camera to the park, his eye learning to frame the world without cropping out the hard parts. Emily and Benjamin fought and repaired, not always gracefully but always quickly, keeping the floor clear of the debris that resentment leaves when it is allowed to build. They learned to say, "I'm here," in languages the other could hear. Packed lunches, warmed car seats, a text that read, "You were right about the joist." And when they sometimes sat in silence, the quiet did not accuse. It rested, because they had made a life sturdy enough to bear weight without creaking. On a late summer night, years after the midnight in the ER that rerouted every road, Emily stood at the threshold of Ryan's room, watching him sleep the way she had when monitors counted his breaths for her. The boy was gone, the young man whole, his arm flung across a textbook as if claiming knowledge with his body, while his mind drifted elsewhere. She thought of the file folder that had once tried to tell her who she was allowed to be, and of the rooms she had entered since. Courtrooms, boardrooms, living rooms, carrying the simple, ferocious truth of a mother who learned that walls can be doors, if enough hands lean. Benjamin came up behind her, wrapping his warmth around her back, and for a moment they were three again, stitched by a fear that had become a story and then a foundation. "We did all right," he murmured into her hair, and she smiled at the understatement that felt exactly right. In the distance, a siren wailed and then faded, and she sent a quiet prayer toward its destination that someone, somewhere would arrive in time. That, after all, was the work they had chosen. To be the hinge, the bridge, the light at the end of the hallway you don't see until someone turns it on.